Welcome back, everyone, to the Lazy Lab Hunting Club podcast. And today we got returning guest, Lieutenant Colonel Oakland McCulloch, and we're going to talk about the Army birthday, which is, as of this recording, today. So I want to welcome you back to the show, sir, and wish you a happy 247th.
I believe that's what it is. Yes. How you doing, Mike?
Doing well, sir. Glad to have you.
Yeah, well, glad to be back. And as we were talking about before that we came on live, I mean, how can anybody compete with the Marine Corps birthday balls and celebrations that you guys do? Nobody does. And like I told you, I think you guys do that one right. And I wish the Army would do more than it does. Yeah.
There's something. I mean, Marines will talk ad nauseum about the Marine Corps birthday, and it is, and I'm proud of it. It is also something akin to the kid who gets a kazoo and just plays it as loud as he can. So we definitely do that and get noticed.
And you should. I mean, all the services should be proud of when they became, proud of their service and what they've done. And I think the Marines do that probably better than any of us, and that's okay. I just wish that we did it better.
Yeah,
we're not going to do it as well as you guys do, but we could at least.
Yeah, well, I want to learn more about the tradition of the United States Army's origins, and it predates both the Navy and the Marine Corps being the oldest branch, of the United States military, and what the birthday signifies, and what famous well-known soldiers in history have really brought the tradition forward.
Yeah. So, obviously when Continental Congress decided they wanted to have a free America, they had to come up with, the British weren't going to just let us walk away,
right,
considering that they were the most powerful country in the world at that point. And so they had to come up with a military force. And the first thing they came up with was the United States Army. And the Navy followed. Well, actually, I think the Marine Corps was second.
I think it goes, I'd be biased.
I think it goes Army.
October 13th is the Navy, and then Marine Corps shortly after.
Yeah. But yeah, so we had to come up with a force that would fight the British on land. And so I think that's that was the logical choice, was to come up with an army. And we had to have a Navy, and that came soon thereafter. And of course, once you have a Navy, then you got a Marine Corps. So I think that if we don't take anything else, it wasn't because it just made sense that the Army came first. That's why it happened that way.
We're defending the land of the United States.
Absolutely. And I think General Washington, is certainly one of the greatest leaders this country has ever produced. And
yes.
And so, but he's not the one I'm going to talk about today. I think everybody kind of knows what General Washington did during this Revolutionary War and thereafter. But yeah, absolutely the right choice to lead the American Army. I'm not sure that America would have been free if it hadn't been for him.
Oh, correct. I mean, I was just getting schooled on General Washington and what he did to establish West Point and hold that position above all else, because not letting the British through. So yeah, there's definitely more to be learned, but I agree. I want to hear more about some. It's unfair to say the lesser known, but they are, because General Washington is such a big figure in our history.
Yeah, oh, it absolutely is. And, and I tell people, I go around and talk to high school and college kids all the time, and I always tell them, if you don't think that the founding fathers were amazing people, I mean, what would this country be like if General George Washington, President Washington, at the end of his second term, when they offered him to be king of America,
Right.
and he said no, and he walked away? What would America look like if he'd say, "Yeah, I kind of like that position. I'd like to have that"? I mean, our
Oh, yeah.
founding fathers were pretty amazing people, and when you learn about how the Constitution and that came into effect, they used a lot of documents throughout 5 documents that throughout history, to kind of put together that the Constitution of the United States, and it really is an amazing document.
It is, and the history of the United States is something that, to be born here and brought up with it and take it for granted as just the way things are,
Yeah.
is much different perspective than I see from, recent like legal immigrants who come through and take their citizenship test and can talk about the Constitution and talk about the different branches of government and the checks of power and the history of the United States.
Yeah.
And in ways that will, frankly, embarrass a lot of people who could know about these things.
Well, and have you ever been to I don't want to call it induction, a ceremony where people become citizens?
I have not.
I have had the luxury and the privilege of having a color guard at a couple of them in positions that I've been in, and it's kind of like, I always tell people there are a couple things that you got to see in your life. One of them, I think that's one of them. I mean, because it is amazing.
Mm.
These people really are grateful that they got to come to America and become Americans. And
Right.
that's the difference between us and other countries. You can go to France and become a French citizen, but you're never going to be a Frenchman.
Right.
You go to America, you become an American citizen. You're an American.
Yes.
No
Yeah.
matter where you came from. And that's pretty unique. It really is. And then I always say a commissioning ceremony in whatever service, and they're all a little bit different. And I've had the privilege to be at a commissioning ceremony where Army, Air Force, Navy, Marines have all been commissioned, and it's pretty neat. And if you've never been to one, that's one that you need to go to. So there are some things that I'm proud of in our tradition. And so we can, Army birthday, again, like we said, isn't a big deal in the Army. I mean, we usually do the Army 10 miler. That's the big run. That's kind of in conjunction with the Army birthday. And then we have, in units that I've been in, we've had cake cutting ceremonies in the mess hall, dining facility. Nothing really, not like the ball that the Marine Corps has. And then the soldiers go on a run that morning. We usually had a division run or a post run or whatever to celebrate the Army birthday.
Are there any traditions with symbolism or any symbols that, I don't know, like I'll shut up about the Marine Corps birthday, but the oldest and youngest Marine will cut the cake. Are there any symbols or traditions that get enacted on the Army birthday?
Well, we generally have, when we have a cake cutting, we follow the Marine Corps thing, and we have the youngest person in the unit, the oldest person in the unit, get the first piece of cake. They're up there and they cut it together with the saber, and then they get the first piece. But other than that, not really. That's the cake cutting and then we usually do a run, and that's really the only things I've ever participated in. Now, there may be other units that have done different things, but in my 23 years on active duty, those were really the things that we did.
I get it. And so, in terms of influential figures within United States Army history, who are we talking about today?
Yeah, well, first of all, I think the battle that I picked to talk about mainly is the D-Day, is Operation Overlord. I mean, when you think, and have you ever been to the Normandy coast on the D-Day beaches?
Not yet.
Yeah, again, that if you ever get a chance, that's one you can't turn down. And I always tell people when this really had an impact on me, it kind of made me understand what they went through. I went there at low tide, and I did that specifically because that's when they landed. So I wanted to see what it looked like. And I walked out to the water's edge, and you turn around and you look back, and the hills that separate the beach from the mainland, and there's a hill that runs the entire way. And you look up there, there's still the pillboxes.
Wow. Yeah.
German machine guns were. And you start walking from the water's edge to where that you go up the hill, where you were no longer able to be fired upon by those machine guns. And you just think, how did anybody survive this? And the only way you survived it was they didn't point the machine gun at you. If they pointed the machine gun at you, you died. If they didn't, then you at least got to get off the beach. I mean, it was really that simple. It had to be that simple.
Yeah, I mean, there's just the overwhelming forces. You know, you could only shoot so many people, and I mean, similar to what we saw at I guess the Chinese army with overwhelming numbers facing the Marines Chosin Reservoir, maybe.
Yeah, absolutely, during the Korean War, absolutely. Yeah. And that's a huge battle for the Marine Corps, and an amazing battle battle and subsequent operations to read about. The Korean War truly is the forgotten war, and people don't read about it the way they should, because there's some amazing things that happened in the Korean War. But I think we put up like 150,000 soldiers on the D-Day beaches. Now they weren't all Americans. There were some Canadians and some British in there as well. And I think there were even some Polish, if I remember.
Oh, really? Okay.
And there might have been a few Free French that went on the first day, but mainly American soldiers. But they weren't all infantrymen. Now everybody thinks in that way, but they weren't all infantrymen, because infantry don't just go by themselves. There were engineers, right. There were signal corps people, there were all kinds of medics. There were all kinds of people who went there with them. So that 150,000 wasn't all fighting troops. They were all a combined armed force, which is what wins battles and win wars.
Correct. I mean, the infantry to support ratio, at least from my understanding, the Marine Corps is like 9 support for every grunt fighting,
which is the lowest of any of the services, by the way.
Right. So I mean, we're talking a lot of support personnel, and the word support, it's not like they're just sitting around giving people massages and hanging out. Like, support is just like, yes, any role except for exclusive infantry people where they're in the fight.
Well, and I was an infantryman. I started out my career as an infantry guy, and then I switched over to armored cav, riding around on M1 tanks. But I always tell people, look, that's the easy job. You want a hard job? Be a logistician. Try to support those guys as they're moving forward, because your base of equipment isn't moving. So you got to go back to that, bring it forward. No, right. By the way, while you're doing that, I'm still moving forward. So now you got to find me again. And by the way, I want gas for my tank every 8 hours. I don't care. Every 8 hours, I want gas.
Yeah, no, there's a lot of just speaking of that, a lot of jobs within the military that aren't as sexy or glorious as the combat arm was won, but wars can't be won without them. I mean, if your supply chain stops, you're done.
Yeah, absolutely. I forget which famous general said it, but they said, amateurs talk about tactics, professional talks about logistics, because that's really what wins wars. You can't win wars without logistics. Absolutely. Which then kind of leads me into what the guy that I want to talk about today, the general, probably not one that a lot of people would talk about and say had a huge part in influencing the Army, but I think he did. And not just the Army, but I think the country, and not just the country, but I think the world. And it was General George C. Marshall during World War II. And, he never, he wasn't a combat soldier at that point. He was an infantryman, but at that point, he was chief of staff of the Army. And he is kind of the one who designed what the military was going to look like, the Army at least, for World War II. He's the one who kept the Army at 90 divisions, said, we can't have more than 90 divisions, because we have more than 90 divisions, that we can't have people who are working in the factories and in the fields to produce tanks and planes and bullets and our food that's going to support all those soldiers over there. He's the one who came up with ways to new ways to get that logistics forward. So I think General Marshall is one of those that in World War II, he doesn't get the credit that he probably should have had, because he probably should have been the Supreme Allied Commander. He probably should have done that, and he would have done a great job. I'm not sure he would have done any better than Eisenhower, but he certainly was more qualified than Eisenhower to be the Supreme Allied Commander. And there were people who wanted him to do that, but he realized that his talents were better used back in the States, organizing everything. So then that was World War II. But then afterwards, he was a huge part. I mean, the Marshall Plan that rebuilt all of Europe was his brainchild. He's the one who figured that out and said, we got to do something. If we don't do something, it's all going to fall to communism. And it probably would have. And I think that we just don't give General Marshall the credit that he should have gotten. As I told you before we started, the 3-volume book on General Marshall is one of my favorites, and I got it as an award for something, I don't know, a long time ago, maybe even when I was a cadet. It might have been for being the Marshall Award winner, I don't know, but it's a 3-volume, and it's still in my office. I still have all 3 of them on my shelf in my office. It's because it is, in my opinion, it kind of tells you how great this man was and what he did to unselfishly stay where he was, even though he probably would have wanted to be the Supreme Allied Commander. He realized that was not what his talents needed to be used as.
Right. So less of the credit and glory and more of, the selfless sacrifice and service. I think General Marshall was also responsible for the studies on, how many, soldiers and service members were actually firing their weapons in combat versus support roles, and just kind of understanding that dynamic. And I mean, I have to obviously tip my hat to anyone who could, like you said, cap the Army at 90 divisions, obviously knew what the supply chain was capable of producing, and to plan and oversee things like supplies going to the campaign in the Pacific. That blows my mind. With the islands just dotting, the Pacific Ocean in the middle of nowhere to get, the supplies where they need to go. I don't even begin to comprehend that.
Yeah, well, and the capping it at 90 divisions, not only because of the people needed in factories, people needed to on the farms to produce, but also people needed in the Marine Corps and in the Navy and in the Air Force. There was the Army Air Corps, but I mean, he realized that it wasn't just about the Army. We needed all the other services, and the only way we can do that is if we cap the Army at 90 divisions. We got to have other forces. So again, I just think he had a vision. He was one of those that could see what needed to be done, and then came up with a plan on how to make that happen and how to do it so that everything kind of comes together and works together in not only Europe, but like you said, in the Pacific, which, the Army played a huge part of the war. And we always think of the Marines, and as we should. The Marines fought on the islands, but there were American Army soldiers making beach landings just as well as the Marines. So
exactly, yeah.
So so he had to understand that piece as well.
Yeah, and like you mentioned vision. Any leader without vision is just a manager.
Oh, I agree.
And I think that's something you said before.
Yeah. I mean, that's the 2 most important things that a leader has to do is, number one, develop the culture of an organization. And I think the military has done that very well over the years. And each one of them is a little different, and as it should be, because each one of our missions are a little bit different. And there's not a problem with the cultures being a little bit different. There are plenty of things that are the same, but each one is kind of unique. And then the second thing is to have a vision and a plan on how to get there. And I think General Marshall did that very well.
I agree. I mean, the odds against the U.S. forces in the islands and not having the element of surprise and kind of being a reactionary, uh, well, reacting to the attacks in Pearl Harbor and Guam and everywhere else, uh, was just incredible. Um, what are some things? What are some other things about General Marshall that we might not know, or for people who haven't heard about him, that they should know?
Yeah. So he was, when he was, I believe, when he was a major or maybe a lieutenant colonel, I can't remember. He was an instructor at the early stages of the Army Command General Staff College. What it wasn't called then, but he was the guy. And so he got to see all of these future generals coming through there, and he pretty much handpicked who the generals were going to be. He
Hmm.
handpicked the Eisenhowers, the Bradleys, and he was the one who kind of fostered or mentored them and brought them forward, and was responsible for them becoming general officers and commanders during right before and right at the beginning of World War II. And so without him, I mean, who knows if it really was. If he said yes, then you continue to move on. If he said no, then you kind of stagnated. So he again, talking about vision, he could kind
Yeah,
of figured out who the ones that had that special talent or those special abilities, and he kind of mentored them and brought them forward to be the future commanders of the army.
that's fascinating. He really shaped. Yeah, he literally shaped the army for
He
combat
did.
effectiveness.
He did. Which
Yeah.
again is why one of the arguments that he should have been the supreme allied commander, because he knew all the general officers, he knew all the commanders. He taught them, and he handpicked them to be the commanders down the road. So I think again, and I believe in selfless service. I think it's what leadership should be about, and he is the epitome of selfless service. He really is. And he never voted. He refused to vote,
Interesting.
which I don't really agree with. I think soldiers still have a right to vote and should vote. But he said this was his justification, whether you agree with it or not. I mean, he believed it and he stood up for it. He said, I have to serve the president of the United States, whoever it is.
Right.
So it's not my job to try to decide who it is that my boss is going to be. I will serve the president of the United States in supporting and defending the Constitution of the United States, no matter who the president is. So it doesn't matter.
Oh, that's an interesting take on that. I like that. And I'm not going to make a decision whether I agree with that or not right now. But what I do notice is that I respect somebody who can live by their principles, and because that's someone you can follow. That's someone who's going to follow through and
Yeah.
do what they say, which is, I mean, more and more rare these days, right?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, when you think about it, I mean, he became not only the four-star general, most powerful general in the army at that point, but he also became, Secretary of State, and came up with, was in the highest echelons of the United States government, and never voted, even when he was not in the army anymore. He still never voted.
Wow. Yeah. Yeah. So there's something I respect, but I mean, I respect people who will update, I'll say, or modify, their beliefs or values based on new information or revelations or epiphanies. Um, at the same time, someone who will remain steadfast to what they truly believe in, is I think a mark of a great leader.
Yeah, well, and again, I'm not sure. I vote. I make it's
Yeah.
I
Right.
believe it's my constitutional right and it's my obligation to vote. But again, I don't think that if somebody doesn't want to vote and they have
Mhm.
just because if you're just lazy and you don't want to vote, I think that's the wrong answer. If you have a conviction like he did for a specific reason, then okay, I can understand, just like you said. But yeah, I mean that very few people know that about him. And that's one of the things in the books about him is that he never voted ever.
Interesting. Yeah. No, I like knowing that. So He's a bit of a wild card, I guess. If you were to modify anything about the Army birthday, change it to exactly how you wanted it to be, what would it look like?
Yeah, well, I think we would have a ball, just like the Marine Corps has a ball. I think that is, and I told you before we came on, I think the the best Marine Corps ball, and I've been to a couple of them, but the best one I ever went to was when I was stationed in Australia, and the Marines, who are the guards for the embassy, as they are in all the embassies, they threw a fantastic Marine Corps ball, and it's not a whole lot of Marines there because it isn't a whole lot of Marines who guard the embassies and do those
Right.
kinds of things. So yeah, so they were absolutely outnumbered by the Army and the Air Force
Yeah.
and the Navy personnel at the ball that they had invited us to, which I appreciated. My wife and I very much appreciated that they invited us. But I think that is a nice touch, and it really kind of then it's not just a fleeting thing or just let's go for a run and let's cut a cake. It's you got to get dressed up, you got to make an effort, you got to plan things, so it becomes an event. It isn't just oh yeah, it's the Army ball, it's the Army birthday, so let's cut a cake and let's go for a run. So I think just so that it kind of embeds it into your mind that
ritual.
It's a special day, and it should be special.
It is just like we have graduation ceremonies where you put on a certain garment.
That's right.
And you act and perform certain rituals. The rituals give the credence and importance to those events. So we recognize them and understand them in context a little better. Plus, I mean, how many times do you really have? I mean, as a service member, to wear your uniform, your dress uniform or your service uniform when you want to, versus just for a uniform inspection.
Yeah.
I mean, there aren't many opportunities.
Yeah, because you got to go to a ceremony that you don't really want to go to, but you have to.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. I've done that many times, and you're right. I mean, that is something that you should want to put it on and celebrate that. And I think the other part of it is that I think part of that problem for the Army, and maybe because again, like it's just so big, is that a lot of people in the Army just don't understand the history of the Army. A lot of people today don't even understand the history of the United States. But I always tell young men and women that we're getting ready to commission, I said, if you don't like history, too bad. Start learning it, because you're joining an organization that history is important to. Now, we don't do a good job of teaching it, but you do need to know the history of the organization that you're joining. And I would argue that that's with any organization, but certainly in the military, the Army, the Navy, the Marines, the Air Force, or whatever, you should know the history, because there's things that we do because of that history.
Exactly. I mean, military service, all the branches have very strong traditions. And if you don't understand why they're there, you aren't as fully invested as you could be, and you are not maybe the team member that you could be if you learn about those and why we do things certain ways.
Yeah, I agree. I agree 100%.
Well, yeah, no. So today, do you have anything planned for your Army birthday today? You cutting a cake or going on a run?
No, I was telling you before, I'm kind of under the weather today, so today's not I'm not even going to leave the house, I don't think, because I just want to kind of make sure I'm okay before I get around other people. But yeah, and I in the unit that I'm in now, of course I'm retired, but in the ROTC program, of course all the cadets are gone for the summer because school is out and they're at summer training or whatever they're doing. So there's not a whole lot of people around for any of the services at the university right now. So this time I'm not in a unit that is fully staffed all today. So I'm sure they're doing something in other places, but ROTCs generally at this point, everybody's scattered to the wind, so there's not a whole lot going on.
Right. Well, where can we find you? What can we see that you're working on next or have done, including your book, Lessons on Leadership, and all the work that you've done to inspire leaders, in our country? How can we
Yeah.
find out about that?
Yeah, so you can go to my website at www.ltcoakmcculloch.com, and it has my book. You can get my book there if you want. It takes you to the link to the book. You can kind of see the history of what I've done in my bio and all that, and then you can see the presentations that I give, and I have given and I continue to give. I think my next one, I'm actually going to do a Zoom presentation to a company in Mobile, Alabama on Thursday. So and I've done that several times before, and it's kind of interesting how that all works. But I enjoy talking about leadership, and I tell people I never turned down a chance to talk to people about leadership.
It's needed today more than ever, I believe, and I'm glad you're doing what you're doing, because leadership, in my mind, has become just a buzzword, but to actually understand what it means and what it takes to be an actual leader is priceless. So I thank you for what you've done. I thank you for your time today, and I hope that you recover well and that you have a outstanding Army birthday.
Thanks, Mike. I appreciate it.
All right, everyone. Thanks for checking out Lazy Lab podcast, and shout out to our sponsor, Ubora Coffee. And thanks again to Lieutenant Colonel Oak McCulloch. And check out the description to see the links of what he's doing and how you can get his book, Lessons in Leadership, and everything else he's up to. Until next time, this is Mike signing off.